Deep message in that. We've had a lot of concerns here lately. The prayer list is long, but we've had some answered prayer too. Sometimes it's easy to make the prayer list 50, 60, 80 items long, and then only one or two on the praise. And we have praise for everything, even when we're going through tough waters. This morning, I want to talk about the giver of true abundance. And our keystone verse for this morning is John chapter 10, verse 10. John 10, verse 10. And when we get past that, the rest of this is all, we're going to stay in the book of John this morning. And John 10:10 reads, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Let's shift to John and chapter 2, and we're looking at verses 1 through 11. And the story here you've probably heard. I'm not going to read all of 1 through 11, but there's a couple of key verses in there, little segments I want us to kind of concentrate on. And I'm skipping ahead to verse 7. So John 2 and verse 7. And the story here is about a wedding feast. And very typical for the time, when they had these wedding celebrations, wine was served. And here in the middle of this fancy wedding celebration, they ran out. And that was a huge, huge social faux pas back then. Terrible thing. People would remember it for years. You didn't plan properly. It wasn't a good celebration. And they're panicking. What do I do? We've run out of the wine. And typically back then, the good wine was served first, and then the not so good wine was served afterwards. And here in verse 7, Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they had come up with 6 big water jugs, and they filled them up to the brim. And Jesus says, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they did. The master of the feast is kind of your organizer, your head of ceremonies, the guy that was supposed to be in charge of everything. And he would have taken the brunt of the blame for letting the wine run out. And the master of the feast tasted this water, which had become wine because of the miracle that Jesus was performing. And he tasted it, and he didn't know where it came from, but the servants did. And the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." Very, very uncharacteristic, untypical. You always serve the good wine first. So Jesus here, in blessing this feast and in being a part of it, not only does he make wine, he winds up making the extra good stuff. And the master of the ceremonies recognized it immediately. We get blessings in abundance when things run out. Jesus is the true source of abundance. And we get blessings day to day. I know some days especially here recently, if I get 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep, I'm thinking, man, I've got some abundance going on. Or maybe, I don't know, it would be neat if I could find a gas station that sold something for less than $4 a gallon. We're all dealing with that. You can find little things, but if you look at the big picture and what Jesus really can do for us, it's so much bigger than that. There are all sorts of stories in the book of John that point to Jesus dealing in abundance. Another one that we're all, I'm sure, familiar with, if we look at John 6 and verses 1 through 14, John 6, 1 through 14, for a lot of us, this is going to be a very, very familiar story. Jesus feeds the 5,000. And there was no food to speak of to be had. And we know the story about the fish and the loaves. But not only does he feed the 5,000, and if you look historically and biblically, we're only talking about 5,000 men. There were women and children that were there on the site. And past that, when all of it was done with, they gathered 12 baskets that were overflowing. Everybody got what they wanted to eat, and there was leftovers. And a lot of it. Not just a scrap or two. That's the abundance of bread. If we look at chapter 5 and verses 2 through 18, and I know I'm jumping around and I'm trying to give you a chance to catch up with me here. 5, 2 through 18. And here's another story. And we start with 5. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. And he tells the story about not being able to get to the pool when the water is stirred up. And when that water was stirred up, there were healing properties and healing characteristics that took place. Jesus says to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once he was healed and took up his bed and walked. After 38 years, this man believed that Jesus could still heal him. 38 years. And yet, hope was alive. There's an abundance of healing. Our timing is not always God's timing, but God hears our prayers. Always. In a world where it seems like there's never enough, Jesus is all sufficient. We can deal with earthly things, sometimes easier than others. But in the scheme of eternity and what really matters the most, Jesus is the one that is the true sufficiency. That's what we need to have our sight and our eyes on. Are we just getting by? Sometimes I feel like that. Jesus has the ability to improve. Jesus improves. It wasn't just food, it was a lot of food. It wasn't just wine, it was the best wine. In Jesus, there is abundance. And whether it's wine or bread or health. He has the ability to handle all of that. He hears our prayers. In Him and in Jesus alone, there is a new way, a new hope, a new gospel, the true gospel, and a new freedom in all of life. All day, everything. We deal with a lot, and our timing is not always God's timing. For 25 years, I had an all-day, everyday business with my father. I still consider it a privilege to have known my dad that well. Good parts and bad parts. I got to spend time with him. What a privilege to have known my dad that well. And when Dad passed away, this business that we were in, it just wasn't the same anymore. I kept it on for another 3 or 4 years, and it became obvious to me that it was time to leave it behind. And the question is, well, what do I do next? Some of my skill set doesn't really translate real well to civilian life. And I wasn't 25 years old anymore. You know? Debbie kind of had a problem with that a long time ago. You know, I was an infantryman. And if you know what infantrymen do, sometimes that's not real appealing to everybody. And 1990, I believe it was, when kind of the balloon went up, and I had volunteered for things before I met Debbie and got to go to exotic, distant lands and meet exciting, unusual people, as we used to say. But there was some danger involved in some of those trips. And all of that happened, and I came home, and Debbie said, listen here, if they call for you, I know you love your country, then you go with my blessings. But this volunteering stuff, now that you're married, that's not going to cut it. I had to think about that for a minute or two, and I thought, well, that's pretty reasonable. There was a part of me that, maybe they'll call me. I had friends that went, and I kind of felt like at some level I was letting them down. But that wasn't something I was going to get to pursue after I closed the doors of the business. Y'all know I was here with the Juvenile Justice Department for a while. And I worked for a company in Augusta, Eagle Parts and Products, for a while. And then I wound up being service writer at an automotive repair shop for a while. At least I knew something about the automotive. But where was I going to land? All of these things, Lord, please put me where I can be passionate about what I'm doing and where I've got something resembling a skill set for it. And through an extremely, in my mind, strange set of circumstances, here I am. You can blame Tom for that. But since when, on my little radar, does being a service writer at a German automotive repair place translate into being here and the privilege of being your pastor? Well, it doesn't make much sense. That old phrase, the Lord works in mysterious ways, well, I still haven't figured that one out. But I can tell you I'm happy to be here. And the abundance of joy for myself at being here is way beyond all that stuff that I did in between that automotive restoration business I enjoyed with my dad and everything in between that and coming here. Patience can be a virtue sometimes. It's not always easy. But if you look at that verse, in John 10:10, the second half. I came that they may have life. And what? Have it abundantly. Have it abundantly. It's there. We may not always see it coming, but God does not want us to be miserable all day, every day. There's an end result through all of it. We don't always see it coming. What is the biggest key to that? Well, if you don't know Jesus, what are you clinging to? The hope for what happens when we leave this place, and we all do. We all eventually leave this earth. So where does the abundance come from? And it won't come from your business or from your neighbor or for your government or whatever else is here on this planet. It comes from knowing Jesus. In Jesus there is abundance, the new way, the new hope, the new freedom for all of your life. If you don't already, believe in Christ and His gift to you and accept that new abundance in life and what's available for us. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.